Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and welcome to my complete beginner and endgame guide for The Division. Not The Division 2, but the original Division game from 2016. Now, some might be asking, why make such a video and guide for a previously live service looter shooter that is now going on 9 years old? Well, the answer is because there's demand for it. I have gotten several requests to do this exact type of video from people saying they're either just starting out or are going back to The Division 1 after years away, and they want a refresher on what's available, how things work, and what content they should be playing. And with us recently getting reassurance from the Division franchise's executive producer that this game is not going anywhere anytime soon, which has been a concern for some given Ubisoft's track record on keeping the servers running for older games, I figured what better time than now than to put together a complete package guide, covering what the game is, the best tips for running through the campaign and leveling up, and how the end game functions, including what content to play and pay attention to if you want to nab some of the best items in the game. So we're going to cover all of that in as concise a manner as I can. Do note that chapters will be labeled in the description below if there's a certain part you're hoping to skip to. And the one other quick thing that I wanted to mention before we fully dive in is that while I have thoroughly enjoyed making this video and The Division 1 is indeed my favorite game of all time, I just want to clarify that I don't intend on regularly making Division 1 content moving forward. My focus on the channel here is The Division 2, so while I certainly hope that this guide is extensive enough to give you all of the knowledge and tools needed to succeed in The Division 1, in case you are looking for more regular videos on this game, whether it's because you're just starting out in it or you plan to be playing the endgame for some time, whatever it may be, I highly recommend that you check out the channel Livid Frey here on YouTube. Now, while I do not know her personally, in my research that I was doing for this video to refresh my memory on how all of the Division 1 systems worked, Livid's channel not only popped up in several search recommendations, but was also personally suggested in many comment and discussion threads that I read. And if you go to her channel, you'll see that to this day, she regularly posts guides and other content for the Division 1 exclusively. So, as I said, if you want more regular Division 1 content moving forward, while I'm sure there are many more out there who are doing great work, I can attest that Livid's videos are detailed and thorough, as they certainly helped me prep for this video. Link to her channel will be in the description below if you're interested. But without further ado, let's dive in. To begin, let's start out with the basics. What kind of game are you stepping into with Tom Clancy's The Division? The Division is a third-person military shooter. However, it also falls into the looter shooter category, meaning that while weapon models, enemy types, and environments are all realistic to our world, the DNA of the game is that of an RPG, where you can acquire higher and higher tiers of gear and weapons as you progress, and in turn, that means that enemies scale their difficulty accordingly. The Division isn't a game or franchise where you're one-tapping foes left and right. Rather, you'll need to scavenge and combine the best talents, stats, and overall power to be most effective in combat. The game also has a slight sci-fi spin, with your Division agent having access to semi-futuristic technology like an advanced AI assistant and several recon, healing, and combat skills. And lastly, with the game being a looter shooter, the campaign and story experience is only the beginning, as once you max out your character's level, that is when you hit the endgame, which consists of many different game modes and activities across both PvE and PvP. And as you may have been able to tell by the title of the video, a lot of time in this will be spent fleshing out and providing guidance for said endgame. Alright, with those top level details now down, let's get into some specifics, starting with your campaign and leveling experience. Now, for me, as long as I know what kind of game I'm getting into, then I typically just like to immerse myself, let the game teach me what it's gonna teach me, and explore my way through the rest. However, as I've recognized by doing similar videos to this in the past, I know that that's not how everyone is. So while I'm not going to spend super long here, I do have some tips and general guidance to offer. Firstly, the campaign will take you on your journey from level 1 to 30. For the most part, it should be pretty obvious how to advance. Main missions are your central campaign missions. They give you the biggest bumps in XP. Looking at each one on the map shows you their recommended difficulty level. You can decide if you want to hit that target before taking it on, or maybe you're feeling adventurous and try doing them a bit underleveled. You can also choose whether to do them on normal or hard difficulty for scaling XP and rewards. In between the main missions of the game, if you're finding yourself needing more levels in order to get up to the recommended power of the next challenge, then similar to many other RPG or looter titles, the map is filled with side missions and encounters to take on, each granting you small bumps in XP that you can then use to work towards that next goal. A few quick tips for your leveling journey. Firstly, in your first few hours in the game, you will reach the base of operations in Manhattan upon leaving the Brooklyn tutorial zone. Once this happens, you're going to earn what's known as a shield. Shields were added much later on in the game's lifecycle, and what they are is a set of 12 one-time achievements that, once completed, grant you some very lucrative rewards. Now, most of them are ones you will pursue and complete once you're in the endgame, but this one specifically is earned for liberating the base of operations, meaning that every player will get it while going through the campaign. The reason I'm pointing this out is that it rewards you high-level and rare endgame gear from the cache you open from your inventory. And over time, I've seen questions from new players on what they should do with these items. Do I sell or deconstruct them to get a jump on my material hordes? My recommendation, once you complete the shield and earn this gear, take it straight to your stash right here in the base of operations and dump it all in there. Leave it until you hit level 30 and you can actually use the items. And at that point, you'll then have given yourself a jump start for beginning endgame content by having these items to equip. I'll bring up shields again later on once we get to the endgame section, but that's what you need to know for now. Next thing, upgrading your base of operations. Again, the game will guide you to this and teach you it to start off, but nearly every activity you complete throughout the campaign will grant you points for the 3 distinct wings of your base of operations: medical, tech, and security. And it can be easy to forget to regularly go back to the booth throughout the campaign to do this, but it's going to prove very rewarding if you do. Reason being, unlocking these various boo upgrades is what grants you access to new skills like your pulse, self-heal, turret, seeker mines, ballistic shield, and more. It also gives you access to new talents, of which you can swap between to curate the best playstyle for you, as well as other random bonuses like access to new vendors, opening up a firing range within the boo, or daily crates to give you materials, consumables, etc. So don't forget to periodically return to the base during your leveling journey to take advantage of all of that. Alright, and then the last thing I will mention in regards to the campaign journey, do not worry about meticulously sorting, saving, or whatever with loot. Far too often I see new player inquiries on social media, in comment sections, whatever, asking what the best gun is to use at level 12. Is this backpack going to serve me better than this one at 19? The reality is, any time before you hit level 30 and the endgame, all that's going to matter is equipping whatever you have that's the highest level. You don't need to try and synergize a build, you'll just outlevel the stuff right away. You don't need to sort and store stuff in your stash, there's no reason to have it later on. Just observe as you go, learn what you can about the gear and stat system while leveling so that you're at least somewhat familiar with it by the time you hit the endgame where it really matters. Other than that, just continually equip your highest level items, and try to balance between selling and deconstructing everything else as you go so that you can stockpile a little bit in each of those categories. That is all the specific tips I have for your campaign experience. Over everything else, I implore you to take your time with it and enjoy the journey. I certainly wish I could go back and play the Division 1's 1-30 experience for the first time all over again. Alright, with all of that down, let's now move on to the real meat of this video, the endgame. You've just taken down Colonel Bliss in his helicopter, you've got 5 pillars of loot and about 27 notifications popping up on your screen. What do you do now? To begin, I want to first just generally talk about the Division's endgame. What is it? What goals do I have within it? And specifically contextualize that with where the game is at in 2024 or 25. If you're watching this video later on, this will all of course still be the same as the game no longer receives content updates or changes. Compared to the experiences you've had with the game thus far, the Division's endgame unlocks a few new things. Firstly, you gain access to new game modes and content, most of which provides unique and more challenging experiences compared to the likes of the campaign. Some of this content is more solo friendly, whereas some is more catered towards groups. Additionally, the endgame begins to introduce new rewards. It's here that the gold high-end gear rarity becomes the standard, and beyond that you can start to collect teal-colored gear set items. These feature unique talents and bonuses that you unlock by wearing 2, 3, and 4 pieces of the same set respectively. Exotic items also enter your loot pools, red-colored gear and weapons that feature strong and otherwise unique talents. And then the crown jewel of the endgame loot grind are classified gear sets. Now, there are no new sets among the classified collection, they're all the same as your standard gear sets. However, using these items allow you to unlock 5 and 6 piece set bonuses, most of which are incredibly strong and define your build and playstyle. And classified items feature higher maximum stats than any other gear in the game. To differentiate between a classified item and a regular gear set item, you want to look for the little folder icon that you'll see right here. Compared to regular gear set items, don't have that symbol. It's also important to note that you cannot mix and match these to get up to those 5 and 6 piece bonuses. You have to be running purely classified items to unlock those highest bonuses. And so, essentially, chasing these classified items will be your pinnacle loot grind for the remainder of your time with the game. And for the majority of players, their ultimate goal in the endgame becomes to collect each of these, experiment with their playstyles, and determine which one they like best. With that said, however, there's one big detail to explain with classified sets in particular that is specifically relevant to playing the Division in 2024. Introduced to the game alongside classified gear back in the day was global events. Now, global events were a monthly occurrence where for 1 week, one of 6 different global modifiers would activate. This modifier would apply to all content in the game aside from PvP, and their base functionality would buff the player. They'd make you more powerful or lethal. The relevance of global events was that by playing different content while the GE was active, you would earn GE tokens, and these tokens could then be spent on classified gear caches, giving you a guaranteed classified item given you invested enough tokens on the higher tier caches. So, as you can imagine, global events was the game's way of offering players the most direct route to farm classified gear, which is great, except there's a problem. Global events have been deactivated in the game for quite some time now. Now, the devs have said that they're working on bringing these back on a regular rotation, but with the team having limited resources as it is to develop their content plans for The Division 2, they've said that it's been hard to find the time and people to make it happen. So, it's TBD on if or when global events will return. If you're watching this in 2025 or beyond, maybe they have returned by then. If so, awesome. And I absolutely recommend farming them in the endgame. As I said, they are by far the most direct way to get classified gear. But since they're not here right now, no worries. We're going to cover what some of the best substitutes are, but I just wanted to explain that slight oddity with the endgame structure as it is in our current day. But let's now get into the details, shall we? Like I said before, you just hit level 30. What do I do? How should I play the Division's endgame in 2024? One of the first things the game will likely point you towards, and a very important concept to understand, is world tiers. They are pretty straightforward. You've got world tiers 1 through 5, and from the lowest to the highest number, changing these tiers scales up the enemy level and overall difficulty of all game content. So when you're freshly level 30, you'll of course begin and want to stay in world tier 1, and then as you earn loot with higher gear scores, you can organically increase your world tier to preserve the challenge and earn even higher level loot. To do so, it's quite simple. You just go into your map, and then in the upper left corner, you'll see the prompt to change tier. Here, you can either increase or decrease your tier to achieve whatever difficulty level you might desire for your current session. Okay, with that concept down, I now want to point you towards a few things. Firstly, remember that shield cache that you opened way back when you were like level 3? We mentioned it at the start of the video, and at the time I said to toss those items into your stash as they would be relevant later. Well, now is that time. If you've got a few classified or exotic items waiting around, you're going to want to throw these on. They're probably not going to synergize together now, as there's tons of possible items that you could have, but if nothing else, they've got good stats, and they're a great starting off point for building up your arsenal and pursuing certain builds. Speaking of shields, I said I'd mention them again once we got to the endgame. In lieu of global events, these are actually one great way to get some high tier loot, including guaranteed exotic and classified items. You can view and track all 12 of these by going up into your menu and up to the dossier in the top left. They'll be the first tab opened, and you'll find that their objectives range in difficulty. Some you won't earn for a while. They include stuff like equipping the highest possible gear score or earning a high commendation level, but some are more based on encouraging you to just play and experience the various endgame content that the game has to offer, like playing a certain amount of underground or resistance, both of which I'll be mentioning again shortly. But yeah, if nothing else, periodically check on shields in case you're close to unlocking any. Alongside those, I also wanted to point you towards what are known as weekly assignments. Similar to shields, your weekly assignment is another passive and objective-based thing to be aware of that you can kind of organically pursue as you play, and by at least being aware of its presence, can net you some good loot as you progress. As the name suggests, these are assignments that reset once per week. You can find them by going into your map and tabbing over to Mission Overview at the bottom, which, side note, this is also a great tool to just track available objectives and content overall, but there are 3 weekly assignments available. 2 are for specific game modes, those being Underground and Survival. If you happen to own those, as they are paid DLC, and you want to play them, then great, and we'll actually be circling back to Underground in a few minutes here. But the main weekly assignment that everyone can access involves you completing a handful of objectives, like defeating a certain number of veteran or elite enemies, collecting a certain amount of specific resources, as well as completing 10 main missions. To my knowledge, that is the one objective that persists every week. Doing all of that within each 1 week window will reward you with a cache, and that cache not only contains 30 Phoenix credits, which are a valuable endgame currency, more on them in a moment, but it also comes with a guaranteed exotic item. So during your endgame journey, working towards completing the weekly assignment each week is a great way to build out your arsenal. Now that we've mentioned them, let's briefly cover Phoenix credits. Whether it's from the weekly assignment cache or a plethora of other sources within the endgame, Phoenix credits are a rare currency you're going to accumulate as you play, and the main thing to be aware of with them is that they can be spent on some highly desirable loot and caches. For instance, here at the special equipment vendor in the terminal, you can buy select exotics and even classified gear caches. So, as you're playing, just remember to keep an eye out on your Phoenix credit levels and spend accordingly. Now, very quickly before we get into the content side of things, in case you didn't discover these along your leveling journey, I wanted to mention two different systems that the game offers you to modify and enhance your gear and loot. Given that a big part of the Division's DNA and drive is for players to theorycraft new build combinations and to try and make them as effective as possible, it's important to know what the options are out there. So, if you visit the terminal, which is the shared social space in the basement of the base of operations, approaching this wall right here, you'll find two stations, the recalibration bench and the optimization station. The former, recalibration, allows you to take any gear piece or weapon and re-roll one of its attributes. Paying to do so will give you a random selection of new options at a random value, so you may need to do this a few times to get your desired pick. Just note that you can only recalibrate one stat per item. Once you do it to one category, you're locked into only ever changing that one on that item in the future. The only exception to that is with classified gear, in which you can recalibrate two stats. The latter, optimization, involves you spending some more high-end materials to increase the values of the rolls on your gear and weapons. This will nudge every category that has room for improvement by a little bit each time you spend, but this does get expensive fast, so make sure you like and want to stick with whatever build or item you may be considering before you fully invest into it. Okay, well now that you know the basics of tuning endgame difficulty, how to augment your builds, and what some rewards that you could passively pursue and earn are, let's get into the endgame content that you're going to want to pay attention to. Something to keep in mind, there are an array of different experiences and content pieces to play in the endgame. And at the end of the day, games are meant to be played for fun, so I highly encourage you to explore, experiment, and figure out which modes, missions, etc. are most enjoyable to you. However, what I want to do is kind of just give a rundown of what some of the most efficient and rewarding content is so that you can decide how to best spend your time. I have three main recommendations to make for content that I think offers the best blend of solo approachability versus group play advantage, overall challenge level, and how rewarding they are for the game's most desirable materials and loot. Before we get to those, however, I have a few runner-ups that I want to throw out there. Pieces of content that are absolutely great for the endgame grind, but in my view have some form of a shortcoming. Whether that's not being as rewarding as other things higher on this list, them requiring greater knowledge and foresight heading in compared to other experiences, things like that. But let's get into this. Firstly, you've got the HVT system, or high value targets. These are your pretty standard randomized open world hunt type of objectives. You can visit the HVT board in the terminal here to select a target, and then you set out to take them down. Now I wanted to include HVTs here because they are quite approachable, easy to do if you're solo, and the loot reward is moderate. You do get a good few Phoenix credits, and you've got a chance to pull some good items out of there, but as far as the downsides, before actually doing these missions, you have to farm intel in order to activate them, and compared to the other stuff we're going to cover, the rewards are a bit lackluster. But if you just want something casual to jump into and do, these are a solid option. Next is the game's open world bosses. Across the open world map, there are a collection of named bosses that roam in specific areas. Now, these are great because they're easy to do. You hunt them down, take them out and their reinforcements, and they can drop some sweet loot, including Phoenix credits and items like exotics and classified gear. But some of the downsides is that each boss has a 4-hour respawn timer once you kill them, and there's a certain barrier of entry in terms of knowing where each boss spawns and what the best routes are between each one. Now that is certainly something you can learn. There are plenty of great guides here online, but farming open world bosses is a very intentional thing to do, not much of a turn your brain off and shoot kind of activity. And then lastly, for honorable mentions here, I have to shout out both legendary missions and heroic difficulty incursions. These two types of content are the game's most difficult PvE challenges, by far. Legendary missions pit you against a specialized sub-faction of the LMB with heightened AI and combat ability, and incursions feature dedicated mechanics and intricate boss fights. Now the challenge is rewarded. Upon your first completion of each legendary mission and heroic incursion each week, you'll be granted a hefty number of Phoenix credits and a guaranteed exotic cache, and that's on top of whatever rare loot you might pull from the boss drops themselves. However, as you might imagine, both of these activities will require a competent and well-built group to effectively take on. So if you've got some friends who want to try these, great, they're absolutely worth doing, but for the majority of you just starting out, these will likely stay out of reach for a little while. With those few mentions down, let us finally move on to my top 3 recommended endgame pieces of content, which, as I stated earlier, I believe offer you the best balance between approachability, challenge, and reward. And if you're looking to play the Division's endgame to its fullest, including acquiring rare classified and exotic gear as mentioned earlier, building up resource stockpiles, etc., I believe these 3 things we're about to cover will get you going on that objective. These are in no particular order as they each have their own uniquenesses, pros and cons, but starting out we have the Underground. Now, one thing differing this pick from the other two that we're going to go over, Underground is a paid add-on and mode to The Division. You'll either have to have gotten the gold edition of the base game, which comes with the season pass, or you'll need to separately purchase the Underground DLC, which comes with the Underground mode itself as well as the Dragon's Nest incursion. You can usually find the DLC or the gold edition for pretty cheap these days, but if you're not willing or wanting to do that, which I fully understand, feel free to skip ahead to the next two listings. So, what is the Underground? Underground is a PvE game mode in which you can take on, solo or in a group, randomized dungeon-like missions within Manhattan subways and sewers. By visiting the Tactical Operations Center, which you'll find the elevator for here in the terminal at the base, you can carefully craft your run, choosing difficulty levels, how many phases you want to run in succession, which modifiers you want to equip, all of which impact your overall challenge and reward level. It's highly customizable, and that flexibility to accommodate both solo players and strategized groups is definitely one of its strengths, and trust me, it's well worth the reward. Underground got a big revamp in the Division's final major 1.8 update, which aimed to simply increase the offerings of what's available and what you can earn. Already, there existed loot crates to pillage at the end of each successful run, on top of the mode having its own dedicated ranking system, providing you with bonuses and rewards as you level up, but thanks to the changes, Underground also now has its own daily and weekly assignments, which we covered earlier. Those are well worth completing. And among other rewarding gameplay enhancements, you now have the chance to encounter Hunters. Now, Hunters are an elusive and deadly enemy faction within the Division franchise. You'll know when you've run into them by the static sound effects, glitched UI, and smoke bombs they use. And while it will be a tough fight to take one down, if you run into these foes while you play, slain Hunters have a high chance of dropping exotics or classified items. That, of course, being on top of the inherent chance those items have to drop just by playing the mode. So, for all of those reasons we just went over, I think the Underground is a fantastic way to spend your time in the Division's endgame. Second pick of 3 for my top endgame recommendations, the Dark Zone. Now, some of you may have heard that name before and just felt a chill up your spine. You might be saying, why would I ever step foot in the Dark Zone? For any who don't know, the Dark Zone is a PvPvE zone within the game. You've likely seen it, it's this big red strip down the middle of the map. The Dark Zone can hold up to 24 players in one server. And while other agents you run into are passive by default, they can manually toggle into a rogue status if they choose to, at which point both sides can freely shoot and kill the other. And if you've picked up any rare loot while playing in the DZ, upon death, that bag of goods will drop on the ground for any to claim. So that might sound horrifying, and again the question becomes, why would I want to go in there? 2 reasons. For one, it is extremely rewarding. The Dark Zone is filled with landmarks, which are basically just small enemy encampments. You go in, kill the NPCs that are there, a boss spawns, and you take them out. Those bosses have a very solid chance to drop things like exotics and classified gear. On top of that, the DZ also features supply drop and contaminated subway events, both of which can net you great rewards. And a more unique aspect of the DZ, it has a ton of scattered loot and material chests hidden around the map, including these that grant you Division Tech, a quite valuable endgame resource notably used to optimize your builds. So it's well worth your time, no question. The other reason I recommend it is that unlike the heyday, where players would dynamically move throughout the entirety of the zone and PvP encounters were much more frequent, that's just not the reality in this day and age. Now I do want to be clear, at some point will you get snuck up on, killed, and have your loot stolen? Likely the answer is yes. But the vast majority of the time, you're not going to see anybody. And most of the people in there seeking out PvP will congregate at specific checkpoints around the map, which you can easily identify via your map. Look for the red and yellow pings indicating rogue and manhunt statuses, and then purposely move as far away as you can before you begin farming. There are 9 total zones that make up the Dark Zone, and that's a lot of space for 24 people to spread out in. So, while I can't promise you complete peace and quiet, I do truly think that you're mostly going to be left alone. The one mechanic to be aware of in the DZ, as I alluded to earlier, is that a lot of the loot you pick up will not go directly to your inventory as it does in the rest of the game. Rather, it goes to your contaminated bag, as can be found here in your inventory. The capacity of this can be increased by base of operations upgrades, but even when maxed out, you will need to monitor how full it is, and when the time comes, head to an extraction point to get the loot out. Extractions can be found on your map, there's typically 1 per zone, and all you have to do is head to the area, call in a chopper, and wait for it to arrive. Once you hook your loot, be sure to watch the rope until it departs, as other players can come up and cut it off, stealing it for themselves, but upon successful extraction, you can then visit any stash in the game to claim your items for good. So while the Dark Zone definitely has its teeth, I encourage you to try it out and see just how rewarding it can be. Alright, and last but certainly not least, we have Resistance. Resistance is the Division's version of Horde mode, where you go in and simply see how many waves of enemies you can survive through. It is a 1 to 4 player PvE game mode. There are 3 maps for it that you can pick from, all of which are in the upper left corner of the Manhattan map in the West Side Piers. As for why it's included on the list here, it's simply fun and highly rewarding. The mode sees you taking down enemies each wave. These waves can be comprised of any enemy faction, expanding the potential combination types and overall challenge level. The bosses you'll fight in the mode are a highlight of some of the game's best, including Riker leader LeRae Barrett from Lexington Event Center, the 4 Horsemen Cleaner Heavies from the Falcon Lost Incursion, and many, many more. The important part is that every enemy defeated within the mode will drop resources. These accumulate at the top of your screen, and you can then spend those resources on various things for that specific run. These include new areas, you can progress deeper and unlock new sections of the map each run that might offer certain advantages. You can purchase turret, support station, and pulse fortifications. These are stationary shade tech nodes that provide offensive, defensive, and support benefits respectively. You then also have access to crates resupplying you with ammo, medkits, consumables, and more. Resistance offers no free refills on anything. The entire objective of the mode is to last as long as you can with what you have at your disposal, and so managing and spending your resources as wisely as you can will be the key to victory. Once you learn the mechanics here, it's a very straightforward and addictive mode, and fortunately it also comes with great rewards. Not only does making it farther into the mode reward you with tiered caches that can contain exotic and classified items, but one of the biggest selling points of Resistance is its purchasable reward crate. Within each of the 3 maps available, a reward crate can be found, and by spending the aforementioned in-mode resources on it, you get to open it and receive a drop. While not guaranteed, this crate has a very solid chance to give you exotic and classified items. And this crate can be opened multiple times per run, albeit with increasing costs for each subsequent opening. So what many players will do is nail down a strategy in which they know how long to save their resources, when and where to spend them, and in doing so create the most efficient strategy for reaching and unlocking the crate run after run. Whether you want to play that way or just run it more organically and have fun as you do so, that's totally up to you, but regardless, the fact remains that Resistance is easily one of the best time versus reward spots to invest your hours into in the Division's endgame. And that is just about going to do it, folks. That is your complete beginner and endgame guide for the Division. I sincerely hope you enjoyed watching this, and more importantly, that you found it informative and helpful in your journey. It's a tall order to try and cram in years worth of content, updates, and systems into one concise guide on a game as expansive as this one, so I deeply hope that my efforts here were successful in preparing you for what to expect within the game and highlighting some of the best features and content to be aware of within it. There's still plenty more for you to dive in and discover on your own, and I would have it no other way. I think that exploration of all types in games like these is priceless, but the things we covered in this video should at least get you a baseline understanding of what the game has to offer and what your goals should be. That said, if you have any further thoughts or questions after watching this, please do not hesitate to leave them down in the comments below. There's bound to be more things you're curious about, and I would be happy to share any further knowledge I have. Additionally, if you happen to be a longtime or veteran Division player watching this, firstly, thank you for being here, but any tips, knowledge, additions to things I brought up, whatever you have that you think you may be worth sharing, it would be greatly welcomed. I think this community is at its best when it's a collaborative and supportive environment, and I would love to create that here for anyone in need. Although I stated at the beginning that I do not intend to regularly make Division 1 content moving forward, which is true, I still hope that you'll consider subscribing to the channel if you're not already. The Division is the soul of my work on here, and so whether it is the Division 2 now, the Division 3 moving forward, I'll be here breaking things down and sharing my thoughts on it all. So I hope to see you around for some of that. And who knows, maybe you can convince me to do another Div 1 video at some point, we'll see. But that is going to do it for me on this one, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold. Ow.